안녕하세요. 브리핑 룸입니다. 지난 2025년 12월 16일 반기문 전 유엔 사무총장이 친정인 유엔 안보리 연설대에 다시 섰습니다. 계속해서 글로벌 리더로서 목소리를 높여온 그가 왜 이 시점에 안보리를 향해 쓴소리를 던진 걸까요? 반 전 총장은 현재 안보리가 급변하는 국제 정세를 따라가지 못하는 신뢰 위기에 직면했다고 직격했습니다. 이를 해결할 방법으로는 두 가지를 제시했는데요. 바로 안보리의 구조적 개혁과 사무총장의 리더십 강화입니다. 그는 유엔은 회원국이 허용하는 만큼만 강해질 수 있다며 각국의 협조를 강력히 요청했는데요. 특히 눈길을 끈 대목은 사무총장의 선출 방식을 7년 단임제로 변경해 소신 있게 일할 수 있는 환경을 만들자는 파격적인 제안이었습니다. 과연 반기문 전 총장이 이렇게 절박하게 개혁을 외치게 된 전후 사정은 무엇일까요? 국제사회의 평화를 향한 그의 진심 어린 외침, 지금 그 현장을 직접 시청하시죠.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council of the United Nations, and ladies and gentlemen, coming back to the United Nations feels like coming back home. I'm speaking today not only as a former Secretary General, but also as an emeritus member of the Elders, the group of independent global leaders founded by Nelson Mandela, who worked for peace, justice, human rights, and a sustainable planet. I extend my special gratitude to the President of the Security Council, President for the month of December, His Excellency Samuel Zboga, the permanent mission of Slovenia to the United Nations, for inviting me to speak today in this always inspiring August chamber. It has now been 9 years since I left New York as a UN Secretary General. At that time, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment that the Paris Climate Change Agreement had entered into force. The Paris Climate Change Agreement was a triumph of human intellect and a significant historical example demonstrating the efficacy and victory of multilateralism. Global leaders came together to address a truly global issues. That was one of the rare moments when the whole 193 member states and 2 observer states, the Vatican and the Palestine Organization, joined their hands on the deck together. The adoption of such resolution really was great success for the humanity and for the world. And together with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the 17 goals, was also another historic moment when all the members of the United Nations, whole world's people became together. Those are 2 very important ones, which I'm still proud of having served as a Secretary General of the United Nations. However, I departed the UN with both feelings of accomplishment and a heavy heart. This was a result of major political turmoil driven by ISIS terror, the bloody Syrian civil war, and ensuing refugees crisis, Brexit, and rising global populism, geopolitical tensions surrounding Russia, and North Korea's 4th nuclear test, and human rights violations. Now, compared to back then, the international situation appears to have deteriorated even further across multiple fronts. For that, I communicate my sincere consolations to my successor, Secretary General Antonio Guterres. This deeply disappointing situation is characterized by confrontation rather than cooperation among major powers. It is marked by the illegal invasion of the sovereign state of Ukraine by a Security Council permanent member, conflict and mass civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip, and the weakening of international cooperation and erosion of multilateralism despite the escalating global climate crisis. This in turn has become a crisis for the United Nations. Mr. President, Excellencies, the United Nations is the preeminent universal institution that fosters international cooperation within the current sovereign state-centered international community, pursuing the common security and prosperity of humanity. The governance of the UN is an outcome of compromise among its member states. The United Nations and its architecture is only as strong as 193 member states want it to be. As humanity's universal body, the United Nations holds both hopes and inherent limits. We now try to do our utmost to realize the vision of the United Nations under certain limits. Thus, our efforts to this end should include change and vital reform of the United Nations to overcome such limits. In this light, I am of the view that UN leadership must more confidently reassert its active political role in diplomacy for peace, including mediating and settling crises. Member states must support this role and guard against situations in which only powerful countries dictate political settlements. And this needs to start here in this Council and this chamber. Mr. President, Excellencies, let me avail myself of this opportunity to make humble suggestions based on my 10 years of experience at the United Nations. The next Secretary General should be empowered by a single 7-year term. Two 5-year terms leave the Secretary General overly dependent on this Council's permanent members for an extension. This is a convention, not a charter requirement, and the General Assembly holds the power to set the terms of the appointment itself. Whoever is chosen as the next Secretary General needs renewed commitment from all member states to support and enable the Secretary General's unique role in helping to resolve conflicts. Even though I did not agree that Secretary General of the United Nations were often called secular popes, they had moral authority. But they also have to hold actual power in order to mediate between two conflicting parties and to more actively intervene in cases of serious breaches of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, such as atrocity crimes. Mr. President, Excellencies, let us be clear-eyed in this chamber here today. The current crisis at the UN stems from multiple causes, but the Security Council's ongoing failure to properly function constitutes the most egregious cause. Indeed, if we are to truly promote leadership for peace, we must fundamentally reform and reinvigorate the way this Council operates. It must be made fit for purpose for the 21st century world rather than the 20th century. The Council has long been plagued by divisions and disruptive tactics, but the irresponsible way many states now disregard their obligations today is especially concerning. In particular, some permanent members of this Council regularly undermine the United Nations universal peace and security mandate through their use of the veto to shield themselves, their allies, and their proxies from accountability. Without concrete reforms to curb the arbitrary use and misuse of veto power by permanent members, the United Nations' sense of helplessness will not be overcome. Civilians will remain unprotected in conflict. Impunity will still reign. Council reform is difficult, yet urgent and possible. Without it, the United Nations risks lurching towards either collapse or irrelevance. Let us not succumb to passivity nor pessimism. The UN Security Council's successful expansion in 1965, which was driven by the General Assembly, show us a way forward. Only one of the permanent members voted for the reform, but once the world had spoken, all 5 permanent members then undertook the ratifications needed for the change to come into force. If the veto cannot be fully eliminated in the short term, efforts to actually limit its use should be strongly supported. A reformed model which would serve the global community as a whole would gain key widespread support. I take this opportunity to encourage those engaged in protracted intergovernmental negotiations on council reform to swiftly table a consolidated model as called for in the Pact for the Future of 2024. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, the path of each for themselves is no different from the path of mutual destruction. It leads to nowhere. Sustainable development is about pursuing a shared destiny for all people and our planet. This sense of responsibility must begin with the representatives of each nation gathered right here. Distinguished members of the Council, Mr. President, please allow me to conclude by raising a quote for our reflection from the 17th century English poet John Donne. No man is an island. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. I thank for your attention and count on your leadership based on global vision and global leadership. Thank you.